Hi, I'm John Anarino, author, photographer, and adventurer. My new book is America's Outback, and you're listening to the great program, The Soul of Life. Stay tuned.
We're the only American Trappist brewery. We only advertised that week 2 nights in the Worcester Telegram, the local newspaper. Saturday afternoon, 2,500 people showed up at the brewery.
Today on The Soul of Life, I speak with Father Isaac Keeley, Trappist monk and brewmaster of the St. Joseph's Abbey in the central Massachusetts town of Spencer.
And who are these people that live this way for a lifetime? And do you really live it for a lifetime?
Since the 1950s, the Trappist monks of Spencer have lived a life of solitude and prayer on a 2,000-acre farm with a modest business selling jams, preserves, and handmade ceremonial garments. But 10 years ago, the brothers of Spencer started researching ways to raise their income significantly.
We looked at electrical generation using a wind turbine, but our best site is on the approach to the Worcester airport. So the FAA ruled that out.
So the monks wondered how else could they raise income as they faced dwindling numbers in their commune.
And then there was a brother who wanted to brew beer here since he had entered. And we knew that there were 6 Trappist breweries in Belgium, one of whom has been doing it since about the 1580s. So we said, they've been doing it that long. There must be some compatibility between the rhythms of monastic life and brewing.
I asked Father Isaac how they fit in the demands of running an industrial-scale brewery with the contemplative life of the monastery.
Our prayer together starts at 3:30 in the morning. So I had to be pretty disciplined about my time and my schedule, and also kind of disciplined with my mind.
And of course, we talk about the beer. For the first 5 years of brewing, St. Joseph's was locked into an agreement with their partners at Squirmont Abbey, home of Chimay Brewery in Belgium. So for the first 5 years, all they could brew was one beer, their ale, which was okay.
The brand is the monastery.
This kept their brand rather obscure during the first wave of the exploding craft beer market when they started selling in 2013.
At that time, they wanted good beer, but they wanted new beers.
But now the brewery has a much expanded menu. And I asked Father Isaac how cloistered monks would really know what good beer is anyway.
We were kind of indifferent to beer until we started this project, and then it became having to learn, well, what makes Trappist beer so special and what makes good beer good anyway?
I try to find out what secrets the monks have to offer us about keeping a work-life balance.
What I've learned is to survive really doing this longer term. I really have to be pretty disciplined about when I think about various things.
Welcome to The Soul of Life. I'm Keith Miller, and this is episode 15 of season 3, Beer with Soul, the brewmaster of St. Joseph's Abbey.
The critics say it's delicious. We don't know how to categorize it. That suits us perfectly.
I'm Keith Miller, and my podcast, The Soul of Life, is here to help you remember who you really are. I'll bring together people who have gotten off their treadmills. I'll have conversations with athletes, musicians, doctors, scientists, healers, and entrepreneurs to discuss the fascinating edges of our knowledge in neurobiology, psychology, and physics. This is The Soul of Life.
Have you ever been in a position where you know that you or your family member really needs emotional support or marriage enrichment, but you find out how expensive it is to get access to high-quality, out-of-network professionals? Well, I've created the Soul of Life community just for this. At community.souloflifeshow.com, you can join for free and be part of a network of caring and supportive people having conversations that can bring healing to your soul. It's there that you'll find access to psychoeducational courses to deal with stress, anxiety, and relationship conflict. For example, right now I'm offering a 7-week immersive course for couples called Mindful Marriage that walks people through a mindfulness-based stress reduction curriculum I designed that really gives couples in conflict a map towards stability, trust, and deeper intimacy. Just go to community.souloflifeshow.com, check out the courses, and join for free to be part of the Soul of Life community of learners and soul seekers. just north of the town of Spencer, Massachusetts, the town where I grew up. At the crest of a gently sloping hill blanketed in oak, maple, and pine, but bared in part by farmed meadows and broad pasture lands, rests St. Joseph's Abbey, a cloistered Roman Catholic monastery of monks of the Cistercian order of the strict observance, popularly known as Trappists. Set apart from the actions and trends of most of their neighbors, they live a contemplative life, dedicating themselves to the praise and worship of God in a hidden life within their monastery. Following St. Benedict's 6th century rule for monasteries, the monks live in silence and solitude, thus rendering God, quote, a service that is at once humble and noble. But if you could view the Spencer Monastery from an eagle's eye, you'd see a very busy place. The brothers of Spencer have been known for decades to make delicious preserves and jams that they sell to generate income. But within the last 10 years, more than just strawberry jam has been brewing in these cloistered hills. St. Joseph's began operations as the only monastery in the U.S. to produce beer. I'm here today to speak with the brewmaster of St. Joseph's, Father Isaac Keeley. Father Keeley, welcome to The Soul of Life. How are you?
Okay, Keith, thank you. Thank you. Delighted to be with you this afternoon.
It's nice to meet you again. You were nice enough to give me and my dad a tour since he lives in town a couple of months ago. It seems like it was just yesterday, but we got to see the operations there. And I'm curious if you can explain what you do and what your work is at the Abbey.
We talk about two kinds of work, at the Abbey. We say the work of God and then our manual labor. So for the work of God is really our prayer. So I've been at the monastery for 40 years. We're a kind of stable community. We're back up to, I think, 50 monks again. And so it's a life of prayer together, and in what we call liturgy, and then prayer separately, where we do private individual prayer and then reading and study. And then to support ourselves, we do manual labor. And we follow this, what we call the rule of St. Benedict, which is a 6th century interpretation of trying to live the gospel 24/7. And so my manual labor, really for the last 10 years, was to research and build and start up and get this brewery going.
That's a lot of work on top of a lot of work. I mean, it sounds like, and just to rewind for a second, you said prayer, but can you explain how often you pray? It's quite a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So our tradition. So we go back to the 11th century, and so our tradition is to we say the night is for prayer and the day is for work. You have to take that with a grain of salt. So our prayer together starts at 3:30 in the morning. So typically our rise is around 3 or 3:10. And we have a service where we basically chant or recite psalmody and do scripture readings. And then also usually one non-scripture reading from the patristic era. So from, somewhere between the 2nd and the 5th centuries. That's about 45 minutes. Then it's gets us to about 4:15, and then there's time for individual prayer and meditation. And that period runs on weekdays until 6 o'clock. So 6 o'clock roughly corresponds to sunrise. And so there are two major hours, so major prayer events daily. So one for sunrise and one that correlates with sundown. Sunrise we call Lauds. And again, it's Psalms, a hymn, it's Psalms, a reading. And then that's followed by Eucharist. We do that on a daily basis in the Eucharist. So that unit ends by around 7 or 7:10. There's another open period of time. And then work for most of us starts usually around 8 or 8:30. And then there'll be a morning work period, interrupted midway for a brief prayer together, one psalm, short reading, and prayer. And then the work period usually ends around noon and we meet again in the church for prayer for, again, usually one psalm and a short reading. And then that's followed by midday dinner. and clean up, a break. And then we pray again at 2:00 before we go back to work. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's these 7 little units.
Wow. I mean, and in between all of that, there's work to be done. And it sounds like that's a lot to take on.
It's a full day.
It's a full day. It's a full day spiritually. So where do you find the time to manage such a complex operation like a brewery?
So I had to be pretty disciplined about my time and my schedule, and also kind of disciplined with my mind. And that's a skill I think that is that I've learned, I think, over the years. Plus, I would say, there's a grace to it. In other words, there's an action of God through the Holy Spirit, which gradually shapes you so that you can do something like this. So my workday starts pretty much by 8:00 in the morning. And so I would be in the brewery really from 8 until noon. And then I go over to the monastery for that midday prayer and dinner. I have an exemption from the 2:00 prayer. So after dinner and dishes, and I take, maybe 10 or 15 minutes quietly in my room, we call them a cell. I would deal with the 2:00 prayer then, and then I come back to the brewery, usually by 1:30, and I would be here until 5 ordinarily. A busy day. A busy day would make it closer to 5:30, but I now at this stage of my life, I'm pretty good at getting out at 5 and back to the monastery. So,
well, the commute is pretty good.
The commute is like a 5-minute walk, so that's ideal. So that works pretty well for me. But in my younger years, when we started up the project, and I didn't have these rhythms down, it was much harder to contain it, and also, to really clear my mind when I'd leave in the evening,
right,
or not start my sort of business thinking until I got here. But what I've learned is like to survive really doing this longer term, that I really have to be pretty disciplined about when I think about various things. And it's not always, as we all know, that's a skill that really has to be learned. And I, for one, would not consider myself 100% successful 24/7. But these days, what I find is if I keep the morning period, like from the time I get up until I get over to the brewery, if I really do keep that for God, that grounds me so that I can do the rest of the day without losing, I think, ordinarily without losing a certain, we could say a certain mindfulness of God and why I'm doing it, why the other brothers are doing it, which has a lot to do with kind of the quality of presence that one brings to the everyday activities of earning a living in this way.
In other words, you find it easier if you're in one place at one time, if you're with God, that you're not doing calculations of grain and shipping dates, and and when you're in the brewery, perhaps you're focused on the work and you allow yourself to get absorbed with that.
Well, I do. Although what I would like to try to express for this point in my life is that by being, say I'm like this morning, I had to get really focused on an invitation to brew some beer for a Scandinavian country, and so I had to really zero in on like the pricing and margins and costing, and can we do it for the price that they would like it for, et cetera. But over the years, what's kind of a gift, I would say, is that I'd say I stay an easy way to say this might be, I stay grounded in a really abiding sense of peace, even while I'm doing mentally these other calculations and things.
Right.
So doing things that once were were stressful, really. Now I can do it in peace. And in that sense, I feel that there's a kind of grounding in God's presence that ordinarily can persist even in the brewery.
It sounds like something a lot of people listening to this would not mind having a little more of, grounding and more peaceful presence of God. Tell me about how the brewery operation got started. Of course, work and production and generating income is not new to your order and to your monastery, but brewing is a new thing, relatively 10 years about, right? So how did this all get started?
Oh, okay. So around the year 2000, our abbot thought he should get some help about looking at sustainability in the long term. And so he put together an advisory board of business people and professional people and academic people to kind of take a look at the monastery and its demographics and our little monastery economy, and to say, what does it look like kind of long term? Because we like to think of monastic communities as having kind of long runs. So, like, for example, ourselves, we began in Nova Scotia we take as our founding date 1825. So we're coming up on 190 some years. So we're saying, well, we got that many behind us. At that point, it would have been like 170 some years. So we say, well, what do we need to do? And so the upshot really was that we should expect our numbers to decrease. And at that time, we probably were about 65. So they have. And they tracked for us kind of longer term the rate of rise of generated income and expenses. And then they factored in we would be aging and maybe not recruiting as rapidly. So what do those two lines when you forecast them out? And so we could see, that the expenses were going to rise more rapidly than the revenue. Mm-hmm. And so they said, you need another source of revenue. So that began a 10-year research, 10 years of research with various projects.
So necessity was the mother of invention.
Oh yeah. We wouldn't. I mean, everybody was pretty comfortable making jams and jellies, and we have a little farming operation, and some brothers do crafts, and we have a little store for our products and other monastic products. So we'd be happy not to change, but we could see we had to. So we looked at doing more of what we're already doing, the jams and jellies, or we make vestments for liturgical, vesture, clothing for liturgical ceremonies. But for various, business reasons, we said, those, we're not likely to be able to grow those endeavors.
Right.
We looked at electrical generation using a wind turbine, but our best site is on the approach to the Worcester Airport. So the FAA ruled that out. And then there was a brother who wanted to brew beer here since he had entered. And we knew that there were 6 Trappist breweries in Belgium, some of whom have been doing it. One of whom has been doing it since about the 1580s. So we said, they've been doing it that long. There must be some compatibility between the rhythms of monastic life and brewing.
Please take the time now to subscribe to The Soul of Life wherever you're listening. Give it a thumbs up or write a positive review.
Part of our dialogue really with the 6 Belgian Trappist breweries and monastic communities. Really, it started with them. So we visited them, we talked to them, and we were looking for a partner. More basically, we were looking for them to get on board with Americans brewing Trappist beer with a Trappist name. So that took some doing. So almost 2 years of conversations. But at the end, two of the larger breweries were interested in being of assistance. And then finally, it got down to one, Chimay Brewery at Scourmont Abbey, because they had the largest footprint in the American market of any of the Trappists. So they, on the one hand, they wanted to help, but they also saw it as if they helped us with quality from the technical side, then that would also protect their brand. So, so what we did was we had a couple brothers go to Belgium and spend 6 to 8 months at Scourmont Abbey to work in their brewery, and we also engaged a Belgian brew engineer, so someone with an engineering degree and a brew science degree on top of that, to kind of supervise the training there, as well as to advise. By that point, I was really in charge of the project, and to advise me on the brewery design and then the build out, because. Right. So there's a lot of technical things to that. So there were a lot of mistakes that could have been made that weren't made just because the head brewer at Chimay, as well as, and he helped me find this other Belgian to work with us. So with that, so that was why. That's why we went with partly why we went with Trappist Brewery and not just American craft brewery in the Trappist monastery, was that we thought it would, by working with the Belgians, we would significantly de-risk the project. So certainly from the technical side, that was absolutely true. So, so we talked about it from like, starting in 2000 until 2010. 2011, we took a vote. By 2012, we started the construction, and we moved in in the fourth quarter of 2013, and did our first brew in the brew house. So we've been brewing down in our old dairy barn. We did our first brew in the brew house. Actually, it was October 26th of 2013. That's a day I probably won't forget in this lifetime. And then we went onto the market in January of 2014. And naively, really, the Belgians had asked us to brew one beer only for 5 years, that first beer, to be sure we really had it down. But we were to learn, the American market didn't really work on that basis.
Sort of demands innovation and in testing things, right?
Yeah, they want, the question is, they want good beer. At that time, they wanted good beer, but they wanted new beers. So, that's another whole story. But getting operational wasn't as difficult as it could have been. What has been difficult is actually growing the brand in the American market, as the American market started its real evolution in about January 2014. So
around the same time, you saw these microbreweries exploding.
Yes, and the IPA becoming America's favorite craft beer, and that's what. Yeah, so that had huge impact on our story, because as rightly so, as local, speaking nationally, local brewers coming of age, as it were, with this style that was so popular and unleashed an enormous creativity for a significant period of years. On the one hand, it was magnificent to be part of that. We wouldn't have been brewing beer if the craft beer movement hadn't been as strong as it had been. But that was when it came of age. And so Belgian beers and Trappist beers, as setting a quality standard, were moved to the side. So then that created the growth of the brand became a whole new challenge that the planning hadn't foreseen.
Ah, wow. And how long did it take you to get up to speed with, and we get to talk about lifestyle and type of things that the average person may not realize about cloistered living, perhaps in a monastery. But I'm guessing that before the brewery, you didn't have beer, or there wasn't the opportunity for people to have maybe a taste for what is good beer. I mean, or is that a naive question?
No, it's not naive, actually. So before the brewery, we would have consumed alcohol maybe 10 times a year. Uh-huh. It would be on major feast days and holidays. Mm-hmm. It would be, and predominantly we would have, if you were to say, what do you drink? We would have said wine, mm-hmm. and it would have been wine with the main meal on those feast days or holidays. On some major holidays, our friends over at Wachusett Brewery, the father of the founder was a long-term friend of our monastery, would come on retreat either for a weekend or for a week. And so he made a point for these big national holidays to bring over a case of Wachusett beer. And we did have another friend who was tied to a major Boston beer distributor, and he would bring over a case of something else. But most of us would have said, oh, we don't like beer. Mm-hmm. We'd think of beer as Miller, Coors, and Bud. Mm-hmm. And, Wachusett was nice, but craft beer wasn't really our main interest by any means. So we were kind of indifferent to beer until we started this project. And then it became having to learn, well, what makes Trappist beer so special and what makes good beer good anyway? Mm-hmm. And it was a whole journey for a little more, and then for a little more intense for me and a few others working closely with me. But before we actually chose to do the project, we did have somebody come in and introduce us to beer, and particularly Trappist beer, but other higher end beers, just to kind of say, this is the world you're moving into. Mm-hmm.
An education, right? Just like anything else, you need to know what you're getting into.
Yeah. So we had a little bit of that, but it really started once we launched.
Are you finding the brand has a place? I mean, not just perhaps in Spencer at the downtown package store, but nationally, or where you would like to see it go?
Okay, so yes. So what we realize is that we are a niche player. So it's a niche brand, and it's kind of doubly so because we're the only American Trappist brewery. And looking at the other monasteries, it's kind of unlikely there's going to be anybody else is going to be competing in the short term. That's for sure. And we people see us as kind of a craft brewery, but the brand really has another whole set of legs to it. So to grow it so that it could really be the principal means of support for the monastery and the charitable outreach, we're basically going to have to become a national brand. So we have found a partner who had experience selling European Trappist beers in the U.S. He's been really helpful. in starting to grow the footprint. So right now, I guess we'd be in about 16 different states.
Okay.
So, and we're beginning to see the fruits of that.
Mm-hmm.
He tells this story, and cut me off if it's too tangential, but he says, everybody thinks the newborn baby, parents think they're all beautiful. And he said, and he had some children. He said, and I'm the same way. He said, but in reality, newborns, when they're really fresh, they've been pretty compressed for quite a while. He said, most newborn babies, I won't say who said this. He said, but it's true. He said it was even true of his own. He said, they're really not pretty. In fact, you could almost say they're kind of ugly, but they're yours, and you're so delighted with them. Yeah. He said, well, everybody with a new brand, they think it's the most beautiful thing in the world, and everybody has to have it. He said, but he says, it's like the baby. It's going to take a few years to iron out the wrinkles and to get, the fan club going. Yeah. So,
speaking of the fan club, do you find that people of faith from other faith communities find a particular interest in the monastery, or people maybe from the secular world finding more out about your monastic and mindful life of prayer? Do you find there to be some opportunity here for conversation about your faith?
So yes. In fact, I would my short-term answer to that question is, in a real sense, the brand is the monastery. We didn't go into it knowing that, but the way we discovered it was, we had some beer that I must have overproduced, and I said, I have to. I'm not going to be able to move it through distribution, so maybe I could just have a Saturday afternoon open house. And I had two beers at that point. I had this IPA, and I had the Spencer Trappist ale. And I said, I'll give them a brewery tour. I'll sample them on the beers, and maybe they'll buy them, and I'll get rid of my inventory. So we did that. We only advertised that week 2 nights in the Worcester Telegram, the local newspaper. Mm-hmm. And Saturday afternoon, 2,500 people showed up at the brewery. Wow. I said, I couldn't figure it out. And we had greeters, and it was a self-tour, but we had people answering questions. And then the tasting where you could buy it. And then the exit, I had greeters at the exit saying goodbye and thank you. And they came at the end of the day when we kind of did the breakdown. The brothers who were doing the goodbyes said, everybody thanked us so profusely, and we didn't know what they were thanking us for. And so, because why would somebody thank you for selling them beer? That didn't make sense.
They were getting more than beer.
They were getting more than beer. And so when we did an open house the next year, and we did it on a Saturday, we did it 10 to 4, and we had the same experience. But what we realized from interacting with people for 6 hours was that, no, just coming to the monastery, and this, we have a really nice piece of property that doesn't even really do it justice.
What is it, 1,000 acres, or how many acres do you have?
Yeah, it's 2,000 acres,
Beautiful.
And like 400 are, in agriculture. So we have these huge fields. And people just had this really wonderful experience of this place. And so we began to learn that beer was kind of the excuse, the cover to come to this religious place and kind of soak in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a whole story starts from that.
It's a good way to put it, to soak in the atmosphere as they're drinking a beer. It's an appropriate phrase.
Yeah, really. Yeah, they're drinking beers and they want to. What we've learned is they want to have access to live monks. It might be as simple as "Hello, my name is."
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of it's pretty simple.
You're actually doing monastic tourism of sorts, I suppose.
I suppose you could call it that.
People want to know what it's really like, what it's all about, and
they do, and they yeah, and they want to know what we're about, and who are these people that live this way for a lifetime. And do you really live it for a lifetime?
Right. We should really also talk about your what beer you have. And when I visited, you were kind enough to give me a gift, and I was worried about it on the airplane. You said, "Don't worry, you've done this many times from Belgium," and you said the beer would survive, and it did. And you mentioned so I'm holding up for people who can't see, who are just listening, but this is the Trappist, the Spencer label that you have, and this is the standard. This is the one you said you were locked into brewing for 5 years, I think.
Yeah, it's the flagship. Spencer
the flagship.
Yeah.
And then you got the premium Pilsner.
That's the whole other direction.
Totally different direction. What I really enjoyed was this fruit series, this peach saison. And really enjoyed that. And the alcohol volume goes up from there. What are some of the other beers that you have? Just sort of down the line.
Oh, okay. So the year-rounders, so it's a Spencer Trappist Ale and the Pilsner that you showed. And then the IPA is the year-round, Monk's IPA. It's really it's neither New England nor West Coast. It's kind of ours. The critics say it's delicious. We don't know how to categorize it. That suits us perfectly. How do you categorize monks and monasteries? So, and then the other year-rounder is really kind of a big beer. It's called, we call it Spencer Monk's Reserve. And popularly it's called a quad. So it's 10.2% alcohol. But it's brewed entirely from a variety of malts. We don't add any spices. And it has it's drier. Many American attempts at quads are pretty sweet. So, and Belgian quads have a certain sweetness to it, but we made ours dry just to kind of adapt to the American taste. We bottled today the Holiday Ale, which we release at Christmas time. So it's hefty. It's it's a light body, but high alcohol, 9% beer that's lightly spiced. It's really festive. From Thanksgiving on, it's the perfect kind of thing for guests. And we're coming out with and the next thing out will be the Winter Warmer, which will be available like late October. So that's a lager. So that's that's one of my favorites actually. That and the peach. And I'm probably skipping a couple, but there's enough out there. They can find them. Go to the website, spencerbrewery.com, and click on the beer finder, and you see the various beers and where you can get them. I always say call retail before you go to see if they have it in stock. Yeah. And Keith, this is wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Isaac. I appreciate your kindness in giving us a tour when I came by, my dad and I, and my grandmother lived just over the hill from you in the Wire Village, the Lower Wire Village. So, we always knew the monks were up to something over there. And it turns out it's been something really, really good, not just, of course, spiritually, but with many flavors. Come to find out, we have a wide palate. So I will enjoy this beer. I'm not going to let it sit around too long.
Okay. Yeah. The Trappist, you have 2 to 3 years on the life. Okay. But the pills, you want to drink quicker. And the IPA. In the IPA. Yeah.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Father Isaac Keeley, brewmaster of the St. Joseph's Abbey in Spencer, Massachusetts. Thanks for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Keith.
Hey, I've started a community for Soul of Life fans interested in talking about episodes or getting more information about some of my teaching on IFS, mindfulness, and relationship growth. Head on over to community.souloflifeshow to get access to this group of really cool people just like you who care about the show. and want to talk about episodes or hear more, get access to courses and support each other through life. That's what this is all about. Please leave an iTunes rating for the show and subscribe now wherever you listen to get more soul in your life.
I like it and it's not harsh to my eardrum.
All right, I will go.